Hello, I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and you're welcome to our weekly video. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. There's no denying that we are at a difficult place as a country. These last few weeks, as far as this pandemic is concerned, have got harder and harder. As we see more and more people get sick, more and more people in hospitals, and more people losing their lives. I have lost friends to COVID-19. I've got many in the church I pastor. We have quite a number of frontline health workers who are finding themselves under tremendous pressure and tremendous stress. I feel for them so much, both the physical and the emotional burden that they are carrying right now. And it's difficult for us as Christians in our churches. You know, this extended period where we cannot meet is difficult. It's hard on people. People being isolated and on their own is a struggle. And I think back to just before Christmas on the 22nd of December when new restrictions going into level 5 were announced that they would take place straight after Christmas. I remember feeling conflicted because I understood totally why, and looking now at what's happened since, we can understand exactly why the government did take the steps in bringing back very strict restrictions. Just everything we see happening now bears out why. But one of the things I was struggling with was I had the feeling that the church was not being treated fairly, because it was announced that gyms, while they wouldn't do group training, they would still be open for private training and swimming, and the fact that churches were going to be closed. You see, I do not believe that churches should just be open no matter what if there's a serious risk of us infecting people with a virus. But I do believe that churches should be treated fairly with comparable activities. And I found it very difficult to understand the one about gyms and churches, because to me, it seems like somebody in a gym that's sweating and gasping and panting poses a greater health risk than people gathered safely distanced to worship in a church. And then that day in the newspaper reports, I saw Leo Varadkar saying that gyms, churches, golf clubs and tennis clubs were remaining open for people's mental, physical and spiritual health. And I thought, hang on, but we've been closed. Churches have been closed. And then I realized that what he was talking about was keeping churches open for private prayer. And from his standpoint, the church was being treated on the same level as gyms, that the joint group activities were being put on hold, but that private training in a gym or private prayer in a church was being allowed to continue for people's mental, physical and spiritual health. I realized that the Taoiseach was taking a very different view to what really church is all about than maybe I was, because I come from a church tradition where we tend to think of the gathering together of lots of people in one service as the be-all and end-all, where he was perhaps looking at it from a Catholic tradition where people going in to pray privately in a church building is a much bigger deal and more common than it would be in evangelical churches. But from his standpoint, churches were being treated on the same basis as the gyms. And the same with sports. That's why pretty solitary things such as golf were allowed to continue and other team sports were not. Well, and actually since then, of course, gyms, golf and tennis clubs have all been closed for both group and private activities, while the churches have been allowed to remain open for private prayer. And as I was thinking that private prayer was not something that we do a lot as evangelicals, God really reminded me of something that we have done periodically in our church in Drogheda, and that is during a season of prayer and seeking the face of God, we've done something called In His Presence. And In His Presence is basically a format where we just have somebody playing worship music on a keyboard, or even sometimes recorded worship music playing. And people come into the church and they don't interact a lot. They're not praying together, they're not mixing together, or the people just find a little space by themselves And there in that worshipful attitude, they begin to seek the face of God. And we've had amazing testimonies of how God has spoken into their spirit. And I suddenly realized that really what we call in his presence is what the government is calling private prayer. Now, unless there's a very unexpected court ruling comes up somewhere in the pipeline that I don't know about, then it's quite likely that the ban on church gatherings is going to remain for a bit longer. I don't think it would be suicidal. I think it would be suicidal for any government to basically open up the churches at a time whenever hospitals are under such pressure and people are dying. That would be political suicide for any government. So what are we as the church going to focus on? Are we going to focus on the fact that we're not allowed to gather in our services and make that what we're communicating and what we're about and what people see us as being exercised about right now? Or are we going to be reaching out and showing the love of Jesus at a time when a lot of people are hurting? You know, we've had 2 contentious referendums in this country, and I was active in campaigning in both of them. And sometimes I had people who would be on the same side as I was in a referendum who told me they wanted to put up posters that were going to be really abusive and hurtful to other people. And I implored them to think again about that. And I said this to them on a number of occasions. I said, look, I'm invested in this referendum, but the fact is in another few months it's going to be over, but you are going to be trying to reach those people with the gospel for the next 20 or 30 years. Don't do something now that's going to hinder you reaching them long term for the gospel. You can make your point without destroying your evangelistic witness. And I am concerned because COVID-19, I believe, praise God, it's going to be pretty well gone this year. We see light at the end of the tunnel. We see a change in the situation coming. So what are we going to be like after that? How are people going to remember us from this time of difficulty that they went through? Are they going to remember us as people who showed compassion for those around us and showed care? Or are they going to say, well, they're the selfish people that all they ever did was look out for themselves? I believe we as Christians really have a decision to make on this. How will our actions during the COVID crisis be remembered by the people who we will be trying to evangelize for the next 20 or 30 years? And I'm 58 years old and I plan to still be sharing Jesus with people when I'm 88. So I'm looking forward at least 30 years after this thing is over. I do believe that we have established through consultation with the government that it is perfectly safe for churches to gather in worship. It can be done perfectly safely when we were at like level 3 type situation in the country. And hopefully what we're going through now will be the last time that we find our government at level, or a country at level 4 or level 5. Please God, we won't be back in this situation again because things are going to be steadily improving as we move on through this year. But in the meantime, I want to encourage us as evangelical Christians to look again at this provision that we have for having private prayer in our church buildings. Yes, it is frustrating not to be able to meet together. And I, as a pastor and a preacher, I'm one of those people who tends to see the Sunday service as the most important thing and the be-all and the end-all when I get to preach to a crowd of people and we all worship together. But until we can do that safely, legally again, then I want to suggest that we take a fresh look at what it means to gather together and simply to seek God's face in his presence. We now have the facility allowed under law for private prayer to gather in his presence. You know, you can do it easily well with people being distanced. They don't need to be talking with one another or anything. Just people coming into that place. They know where they're in the same building with other brothers and sisters who love the Lord, and they just find their own little space and they just praise God and ask God to come and speak to them and give them direction for their lives. I do believe that if we will utilize that and make use of what we have got now instead of complaining about what we haven't got, then we can become a better church for reaching people for Jesus for years and years to come. It's going to take grace, but I believe God gives grace to those who ask. And I would encourage each one of us to seek the face of God at this time and seek to ask God to show us how we can be the best witness we can possibly be to the people around us who need Jesus in their lives. But God bless you. We're living through tough times, but better times are coming. It is Friday, but Sunday's coming. God bless you, and please join us again next week for another video presentation from Evangelical Alliance Ireland.